This is the Franchise QB Podcast, where we empower entrepreneurs to win big in franchising. We huddle up weekly to educate our audience about the most successful small business model ever created, franchising.
Welcome to the Franchise QB Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Halpern, a 20-year industry veteran and entrepreneur. My mission is for listeners to achieve their American dreams of creating wealth and independence through franchise ownership. Every week, we speak with franchisees, franchisors, or vendors that support the industry. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Joining us in the huddle today is Jason Henshaw, Franchise Development Director with Monster Tree Service. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for introducing me.
Absolutely. Glad to have you here. So I want to talk a little bit about your background. A lot of people listening may not understand the credentials that come along with franchise development. So you are a certified franchise executive, which is a kind of credential that's granted by the International Franchise Association, or the IFA. And on top of that, you have a certificate of franchise management from Georgetown University. Give us a quick understanding of how you earn those credentials and kind of the skills you achieved during that process.
Yeah, so I was fortunate enough to work for a franchise brand that basically covered education, right? So I wanted to always achieve my CFE from the IFA. And fortunately enough, they were able to pay for that for me. This was years ago. And so I took the course and I got 100%, by the way.
Nice, man. Congrats.
Yeah, I got all the questions right. And, I studied really hard, and I'd already been in franchising for a while, so it wasn't that hard for me. And then I heard about this opportunity through Georgetown University. It's like an extension program taught by this gentleman named Ben L'Italian. If you're not familiar with him, he's big in franchising. He does a lot of charitable franchising, which is pretty cool. He helps charitable organizations buy franchises, and the revenue they make goes to the charity. So he came up with this concept. He created this company. I forget what it's called, but it's a give back company. If you ever want to find him on LinkedIn, Ben L'Italian's his name. So he teaches this. He's a professor. He teaches this course on franchise management. It's more directed towards operations. Okay. So I'm in a development role. But at the time I was doing both. So it was definitely beneficial to me and learning more about the operations side and techniques and tools that you can use to improve your system. So he still does the course as far as I know. So if you're out there and you're in the franchise space, whether you're in operations or development, I recommend taking that course. I think it was once a quarter for a year, so 4 quarters.
Yeah, very cool. And you mentioned, you kind of referenced before that you got your CFE at a previous franchisor you worked with. So obviously you've been in the franchise space a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about the Jason Henshaw story? How did you find your way into franchising?
Yeah, so like most people, I fell into it, right? Like nobody wakes up in the morning or goes to school for franchise. I mean, they have that one extension course, but there's no degree, right, in franchising. So most people and every person I met, I'm sure, Mike, you would agree, that you just kind of one day it connects to you and it's like Neil Diamond. You either love it or you hate it, right? And so I'm one of the people that got bit by the bug, so to speak, and I never looked back. And so I started out being an owner. From ownership, I got introduced to validation, which is connecting potential candidates with owners, which I was one of them at the time. And I was closing deals. They were sending people to me, and they were winding up going back to headquarters and signing. So like, whatever the heck you're saying and talking to people about, it's working, and they're engaged and excited about buying the brand. So long story short, they brought me on, started working on operations and development, multiple brands along the way. And here I am today with Authority Brands and Monster Tree Service. And funny, before I got into franchising, this is a connection I'm sure you'll agree, I was in the landscape design and architecture business. So I had my own business doing design and architecture for commercial and residential properties. Okay. So I come from the tree world. I was a plant nerd. I was a certified horticulturist, certified arborist, all those things. So I think I've finally landed in the perfect spot for me because I can talk about the tree world, but also franchising as well.
Yeah, it's all come full circle for you. That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I'm the same way. I fell into franchising when I was out of college. I worked for a .com. That was a really great experience, but they, ran out of money. And then I fell into franchising after that. My boss knew a guy that was doing some restaurant franchise work. And I said, that sounds interesting. And That was in 2001, so 23 years ago. So I
Wow.
think that's a pretty common thing. A lot of
I
people
think so.
don't go looking for franchising. Franchising just kind of finds them.
That's right.
So very cool. Thanks for kind of sharing that with us. So let's talk about your brand. You got the logo on the shirt, Monster Tree Service, part of
Of course.
Authority Brands. You know, I love working with you guys. Tell us a little bit about what is Monster Tree Service.
Yeah, so Monster Tree Service is the largest and first tree service franchise in the U.S. We get tons of accolades every year. You know, if you were to come to our headquarters, you would see our walls lined with plaques and trophies from all the, you know, people that we've done business with, from all types of media sources, Entrepreneur Magazine, Fortune 500, media industry insiders like Franchise Dictionary, Franchise Business Review, et cetera, just for the way that we do business. And essentially, we do all services for the property. So it's a little bit of a misnomer that we're called tree service, because we also treat shrubs. We do shrub maintenance. We also do plant health care, which is treating all services, the turf, you know, so grass, as well as all living plant material for disease, pests, and fertilization. So obviously, trees are our bread and butter. It's the largest revenue source, but plant healthcare is not far behind, and the margins are about 70% on that service.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, Monster Tree has been kind of a go-to for me when I have a candidate that's like, I am stuck behind a computer all the time. I'm sick of this, looking for a new way of life, and I want to be outside. And I know, and we'll get into this a little more, that the owner's not necessarily up in the tree, but it's an outdoor opportunity where you can go visit your sites and you can be outside. So I know that kind of resonates with a lot of people. So let's kind of expand on that a little bit. What makes Monster Tree Service a great franchise opportunity? There's a lot out there. What kind of makes the tree service and kind of the outdoor services space interesting for someone that's coming in and looking for a great business?
Yeah. So number one, first and foremost, you know, I always like to spotlight, put in big bold letters on a billboard. We are not looking for someone from the tree service business, right? Like you don't have, like you mentioned, you don't have to have that experience. In fact, none of the people we've brought on have ever been from the tree world. And so that speaks volumes about our support system. So that's probably what I would hang my hat on, is that the level of support that we provide is bar none. It's going to be everything you need to function and run the business. Of course, you're going to be hiring the professionals, the certified arborists and tree care professionals to do the work, but your work as an owner is going to be more administrative: hiring, firing, ordering equipment, payroll, you know, dealing with vendors, et cetera, customers, some sales, things like that. We can satisfy both semi-absentees, so somebody wants to hire a GM, all the way to the guy that wants to be owner-operator, wants to do this every day. You know, that's kind of the main thing about our brand, is that the level of revenue that we perform at, and you know, we can talk about item 19 data if you'd like to, but the level that we perform at can very easily replace, you know, six-figure salary. So, you know, we find that people that come into our business model, you know, can very easily do that without the worry of like, how the heck am I going to know about operating a tree business, right? So we kind of remove all of those fears and are able to provide the level of support they need to do that. And we've done that. We've been doing this for over a decade with, you know, almost 300 locations. So we're pretty good.
And I think being first to market in the space is meaningful because obviously it's a highly fragmented market. There's a lot of independent mom and pops that are doing this, and to be the first one to come with a branded professional kind of approach to it is meaningful. And I know a lot of people talk about, I don't want to get into a business that can be replaced by Amazon, and you guys can't really be, you know, taken away by Amazon adding another service to their offering, right?
Yeah. I mean, I always like to say when I talk to candidates, you know, that's one of the things, right? Can't be replaced by Amazon. Amazon hasn't figured out a way to, you know, with robots or drones or something, remove trees, right? Maybe one day they will, and that's kind of freaky and scary. Something with a blade spinning around, flying through the air. But another thing is that, you know, as long as there's trees on this planet, right, there's going to be work for us to do. If there's no trees, well, we're probably in bad shape, right?
We're I think that's a ways out.
Yeah.
Very cool. So let's talk revenue streams. You mentioned before that you're not just trees. So how does a Monster Tree Service franchise owner generate revenue? Talk about some of those ancillary services.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the main services that we perform are, you know, tree removals, tree trimmings, stump grinding, emergency services. You know, that's a biggie. You know, storms come, and while it's a bad thing for most people, they don't want them. You know, it's dollar signs. You know, hate to be crass, but it's dollar signs for our business, right? When
those windstorms come all the time. It doesn't have to be this big monster like Category 4 or 5 hurricane. Like you get a bunch of days, especially in the Northeast where I live in kind of Virginia area. It's these winds come through and the trees are everywhere. Someone's got to get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, so there's the emergency services. Also, there's a lot of opportunity with commercial and municipality work. We're signed up with Bid Prime, where we have access to all bids that come from government and also from large, commercial properties. And basically we redirect those bids towards the local franchisees. So they don't even, it's just part of being in our system. We're going to have those things flow towards them. In addition to that is the plant healthcare. So that's kind of our biggest target for the next 2 years. Currently, plant healthcare makes up about 10 to 15% of revenue across the system. We're wanting to double that, get to around 30% because of the margins. The margins, like I said before, are about 70% because really think about it. It's just a guy going out on the property spraying some chemical, right? There's not a lot of costs associated compared to tree work where it's big, heavy equipment, lots of fuel, lots of employees, lots of machinery. This is very low budget. That's why the margins are so gigantic on service and why we're targeting to generate a lot more of that in the coming years.
Yeah. No, and I like the commercial and municipal side of it because, the big buzzword is recurring revenue. A lot of investors want something where the customers are going to come back time and again. And if it's an emergency service or a tree, that's not going to happen every month, every year. But if you have a contract with the county or the township or whatever the municipality is, or a commercial property, then all of a sudden, month in and month out, you're going to have that.
That's right. That's right. And that's a great thing that you bring up. We have one of our franchisees in South Florida that just recently, within the last month or two, I think, got a job with a local golf course. So nonstop, right? They like their stuff looking perfect all the time. Their plants need fertilization. Their trees need trimming, for the fairways, all that stuff. They landed that gig. And so they're set. It's a contract. It's contract driven. Now, even if you're not doing that, right, if you're not going that large, and that's great. If you can achieve that, that's kind of an anomaly, right? Let's face the facts. But the reality is with plant healthcare, it is recurring, right? You're getting on that property because by the nature of the service, if you're not treating it every month, it's not going to take effect. You need to do that for it to be effective. So there's some ancillary things that happen because of that a lot of people don't think of. All of our vehicles are these bright, orange and green colors wrapped head to toe with this dude on the side in the trees, right? So you can't help but see it. These are big trucks. So, we're getting on property and we're treating that property every single month. It's a mobile billboard. Customers are seeing neighbor across the street, person walking a dog. They're going to see that. In addition to that, one other thing that happens, you can't help if you're coming every month, you're going to get to know that customer, right? They're going to get to know you and you're going to create a relationship. And from relationships come the greatest thing, the cheapest lead, referrals, right? $0, right? So we get a ton of this. We do a lot of business for the referral.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that because a monster tree owner comes to the market, they're new to market. I mean, the branding definitely pops. But how do they become part of the community to enjoy kind of long-term success? You mentioned referral partners. Do you train owners on how to build those referral relationships so they can start to enjoy some pretty customary kind of increases in jobs and revenue?
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of our initial training is we're teaching them different marketing strategies, sales strategies locally. Some things as simple as showing up to the local, HOA's office or construction company's office every single month with a dozen donuts with your business card and saying, hey, would love to get your business, think of me, et cetera. And that, it sounds cheesy, but it works. Being a part of your local, what do they call that? The group of businesses.
Group or
all those things locally, right? There's Chamber of Commerce is what I was thinking.
Chamber of Commerce, yeah.
So being a part of those is super, super crucial and important to do. In addition to that, we're doing things to make sure that we're in the marketplace from the very beginning. So being part of home shows, going to those events, right? Chances are, usually 99% of the time, we're the only tree company there. It's mostly roofers and people that do home, kitchen remodels, things like that. We're the only tree company there. So we're going to get that business. And that reminds me of another anecdotal story. We just had a franchisee launch. He hasn't even launched yet. He just signed up a couple months ago, went through training. And then after training, he attended a home show. He booked $36,000 worth of business at that home show.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
Love to
he's
hear stories
started
like that.
yet. Yeah. So
Yeah,
he's getting
because
ready to launch.
yeah, a lot of people think that when you join a franchise, it's all done for you, but there's a lot of grit and hard work. I mean, the franchisor gives you this template and they give you recommendations, but it's up to the owner to execute and go out there and do it.
Correct.
So it's
Correct.
great to see that they're taking that advice and they're kind of converting that into, some really pragmatic early sales after a
Right.
new launch. So you mentioned the launch. So like if a franchisee comes on board, what does their team look like when they launch? And then does Monster Tree Service or Authority Brands assist with recruiting those new employees to kind of take on these specific roles on the team?
Yeah, so that's a great question. You start with 3 to 4 employees. And the reason I say 3 to 4, it's not exact, and is because a lot of times the owner operator in the beginning to save on cost will assume this sales position role. So that is a role we can either hire for if you're uncomfortable with doing sales for whatever reason or just don't have the time, right? Say you're doing a semi-absentee model. Or if you are comfortable, you'll do that. You'll save on cost because typically a salesperson is going to get 10% of that revenue, right? So you're giving that away right away to your salesperson. But
Right.
if they don't assume that role, we'll help them hire out that person. Also, the other 3 people are going to be climbers, 2 climbers, and a ground person, the guy's putting the wood in the chipper and all that stuff on the ground. So
Okay.
yeah, to answer your question, yeah, we have an in-house talent acquisition team. While, because of joint employer laws, we can't hire them for them, right? We can't make the decision. That's not our job to do, the owner's job to do that. But we do everything else around it. So we are going to go out into the marketplace, look for these people. We go to the traditional places like Monster, Indeed, et cetera, but we also go non-traditional places because let's face it, tree climbers are not necessarily resume writers, right?
Right.
So we go to where they're at, right? We go to message boards, tree-related, websites, et cetera. We've been doing this a long time. We have like 45 different resources that we put, out for when we're looking for a job for a franchisee. Once we get those resumes in or those interests in, we will provide them. We'll kind of pre-screen them, make sure they have the necessary licenses, certifications, make sure they are who they say they are, essentially. They have the experience necessary. And then we hand them over to the franchisee for interviewing, but it doesn't stop there.
Yeah.
We understand, like, hey, you're not from the tree world. What questions are you supposed to ask these guys, to make sure you're kind of getting the right person for the job? We basically provide scripts, basically some guidelines around what questions would be best to ask for that particular role. And then post-interview, they're going to kind of come to us and we're going to give them guidance, based on the answers they gave. Does it sound like they were answering correctly? Or conversely, does it sound like they made a bunch of stuff up, right? So, well, we just want to make sure that we get the right person. It's in our mutual best interest to get the right person in the spot. So that kind of leads back to what I said earlier. We knew from the very beginning when we started this brand, right? Because we're the guinea pigs. Like there's other imitators out there that are doing what we're doing now, but we took a big risk. We asked people before we jumped into doing this as a brand, is it a good idea to do a tree service brand? They're like, there's no way you're going to be able to do this. It's too complicated. It's too costly. You're never going to be able to get people trained. Here we are, a decade later, as big as we are. So part of that equation is that we knew from the very beginning that, if we wanted this to work, we had to have something like a talent acquisition in place just as a piece of the puzzle to make sure that we get, people up and running as quickly as possible.
And it's good that you guys give them all that support and guidance and scripts and just have someone to talk to ask, are we doing this right? Because, new franchisees aren't going to be great at it. They're going to get better at it over time. When they hire their 10th guy, it's going to be a lot more streamlined than when they hire their first. So just having you guys to lean on when they go through that, because really you're trying to find people that have a pattern of certain behaviors. They're going to be excited about the work. They're going to show up on time. They're going to do a good job. They're going to be committed to it. And, not everyone fits that criteria. So, people mean a lot in this business and most businesses. So it's good to see that you guys kind of jump in and help with that. So we get the team in place. Tell us a little bit about some of the kind of back office stuff, the business management software that an owner accesses that helps them run this business. What kind of tools do they get from Monster Tree?
Absolutely. So, part of it is a CRM, it's not new, right? Everybody's got one of those. If you're worth your salt in business or in franchising, you're going to have a CRM to help you. I'm sure you use one to manage your business, right?
I do.
So everyone has one. So, what I always like to say when I talk about that particular piece of software is that it's only unique in one aspect. The rest of it's pretty much all the bells and whistles you'd expect from Salesforce or whatever else you're using. Customer resource management tools, sales tools, KPIs, all that stuff is there, right? But the main thing that it has is its routing and optimization software. So what is that? Well, what we don't want is your crew driving like an hour between jobs, right? That's just an inefficient use of the time. Yeah, exactly. And waste fuel, right, et cetera. So what we want is them kind of going from job to job as quickly as possible so you can get as much done in a day. So once we land that quote, right, once your salesperson goes out or yourself lands that job with that customer to sign on the dotted line, and the routing and the software knows where the job is located, how many hours it's quoted for. It's going to find the perfect slot in your schedule for that to go. It's going to use geolocation tools, et cetera, to make that happen. So you don't have to, like, as an owner, if you don't have something like that, you can imagine you're pulling up a map, you're pulling up a calendar, you're figuring out where things jive and go together. That's just crazy. So a lot of time consumed doing that. So this does this for you automatically. In addition to that, it sends an automated email to the customer saying, hey, ma'am or sir, we're going to be on your property at this date and time. Right. So
yeah, that's cool.
It's a lot
and that also, I'm assuming that also helps with estimates, like the software will.
Oh, yeah. It has, and I think that's, I didn't mention it because that's kind of standard stuff, estimating software, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work not to, kind of demean it, but, there's a lot of work that goes into building that estimator, right? We have to understand locally the pricing structure because the pricing in California is not the same in your neck of the woods, right? So we have to build all that into the quoting calculator to make sure it makes sense for where you're located. So that, when the salesperson does do the quote, they're basically just essentially calculating how many hours the job is going to be, and it does the rest, right? It does the math. It's pretty easy.
Very cool. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about the training. When a new candidate goes to Monster Tree Service Academy for training, tell us about that experience. Tell us a little bit about the support team they get access to. So when they launch, every business is going to have growing pains. Tell us a little bit about how they're supported.
Yeah. So our training is pretty extensive. I think you said you've been in franchising for over 20 years. I've been in it for over 13 years. Every brand I've ever worked for, usually training is like a week, right? Mm-hmm. Ours is double that. We do 2 weeks of training, and we do that because, mainly the biggest chunk of it is safety, right? Like, let's face it, climbing trees with sharp objects.
Yeah, that can be precarious.
Yeah, there might be some safety issues there. So we want to make sure that we spend a lot of time doing that. So we hire a third-party vendor in addition to our own crew. We bring you on live job sites to make sure that we kind of push that really hard. So that's why we incorporate a third-party vendor on the training aspect for tree safety. And we also bring in a third-party vendor for sales. So they're getting access to these tools that we're paying for, right? It's coming out of our pocket. We're hiring these third-party vendors to come in person to their training and spend 2 weeks with them to go over all these things. I mean, not 2 weeks on training, but part of it is training.
And when you say sales, do you mean like client acquisition techniques, like how to go out there and land?
Yeah, I can't mention the name, but it's a third-party vendor that's very famous for their sales tools and techniques that cool. You can hire if you wanted to, right? It's covering everything that you need to know. We're covering tree science. You're not going to be an arborist or something by the time you end training, but you're going to have a lot more understanding of trees. The great example I always like to give is, this is like another anecdote from one of our franchisees. He said when he came in the training, he can maybe tell you what an oak was and what a palm tree was, but that was about it, right? By the time he left, he said, I'd be walking my dog down the street and I'm like naming all the species of trees, right? So it does work. I know it's a short period of time, but it does sink in the way that we do it.
And I like that you guys put an emphasis on sales from the get because, most businesses are really dependent on two things, having a really good business development and sales arm, and then being really good at fulfillment. And in Monster Tree, you have to be really great at those two things because you got to get the jobs, and you have to be able to execute and give great service. So having professional sales training, ongoing sales training support, that's really going to make or break someone's business. And the fact that you guys look it in the eye and do it from the beginning and set that cultural expectation that we understand that We need to have a great value proposition to our clients. We need to teach you how to do it. And it's important to us. I mean, that shows like that you guys, aren't trying to hide from the fact that to be great, you need to go out there and kind of acquire clients. And the best way to do it is have the best training.
Absolutely. And that's why we invest heavily into, we don't have to do that, right? We can use our internal sales team or, to teach them, but we're bringing in a third party vendor, but they have access to their tools and software ongoing to kind of make sure they're up to snuff on sales. Part of our process too, I like to mention this as well. Once training ends, right? That's like, it's not like, okay, good luck, see you later, bye. It doesn't end, right? So you get assigned someone called a regional operations partner, right? Support partner.
Okay.
This is someone that's led, managed, or owned a large scale tree business. And they're also usually an arborist or master arborist. So there's really no question you can ask them about the tree business or science of the tree. They're not going to be able to answer, and they're regional. So they're going to be able to help you with those regional like species or disease questions, or just competition, pricing, et cetera, licensing, all that stuff. They're going to assist you on everything that you need to know. And they're available to our franchisees 24/7. They're dedicated to them, right? They're in their region. This is the people they're responsible for. They have monthly KPI reviews. We call business review calls, because we know from month one to maturity, like where you're supposed to be, right? And if you're not hitting those goals, we got to fix that problem early before it becomes a big problem. So there's a lot of support involved. It's not just, training and then, call us if you got a problem kind of thing.
Yeah, no, it sounds really comprehensive. So thanks for kind of walking us through that. So let's talk a little bit about kind of who the ideal candidate is to be a Monster Tree Service franchise owner. What are the characteristics you look for? What makes a great owner? I know you mentioned that, they don't have to be technicians that are climbing trees. So what do you look for?
Yeah, so the easy answer for that is that we find by way of the investment. So let's face it, this is big equipment, right? This stuff is not cheap. It's about 70% of the investment. We find that by way of the investment level that we're getting, it just kind of works out naturally, organically, that we're getting exactly who we're looking for, right? You don't have access to that kind of capital or can even look at this investment unless you've got some business acumen, know what a P&L is, have had some leadership, responsibility in the past, or been a previous business owner or close to ownership, right? At C-level. So we're finding that all the candidates that we're getting, the people that we're talking to that are interested in this brand, are people that, know their stuff. They know their numbers. Mm-hmm. I'm talking to it's usually a very educated and sophisticated investor. So, that's been my experience with the brand. I've been with it for over a year now. It's not too many people I get on the phone that aren't really kind of fit that mold, but everything else we teach, right? As long as they kind of have those structural things in place, we can teach the rest.
So basically you're looking for, we don't need the tree experience, but we need decision makers, have to understand how to read a P&L, have to understand how to build a team and kind of be able to,
manage
be in the people business.
Yep, exactly.
Very cool. Awesome. So talk about the territories. If someone comes on board and secures an area, what are we talking about? Is it population? Is it, land size? What does that look like when you carve out an area for a new owner?
Yeah, our territories are based on population. Okay. There are 200,000 people is a standard territory for us. One thing that I always like to point out about, and this is kind of a big differentiator for the brand that I may not have mentioned previously, is that typically in franchising, when you buy one territory, right, the franchisor is going to have either an agreement or somewhere that says you've got to invest in that territory, right? There's equipment, there's personnel. If it's a brick and mortar business, you got to rent a space, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. And if you buy a second one, they're going to say, well, do that again, right? So investment times 2. With us, you can get up to 1, 2, 3 territories, so up to 600,000 in population, and the investment is 1x. Because we know in the beginning, you're going to very easily be able to manage that customer base, as you're growing with that initial group of employees and equipment. But at some point, you're going to have that good problem when you've maxed out, right? You can't possibly do more work with the amount of employees and equipment you have, and you have to reinvest in the business. So it's truly what we call scale on your own terms model. You add people and equipment as necessary. And what that translates to is a lot of territory for pretty cheap, because all you're really paying for, you're not making that investment times 3. You're just paying the investment, the franchise fee to secure the territory, and that's it.
Yeah, very cool. So I want to get into that in a minute. I want to talk item 7 and item 19, but give us a sense of where you are as a system right now in terms of how many territories are currently open and operating, and how many are onboarding? What's your geographic spread throughout the U.S.? What does that currently look like?
Yeah, so we're about 80 franchisees. I think about 200. I think we're up to 250 territories across 34 states in the U.S.
Awesome. So you guys have a pretty big footprint.
Yeah, I mean, been around for a while, long enough to kind of hit that, and we're just not, we're not international yet. We're thinking about Canada. It's in the future. It's in the works. But yeah, continental U.S.
Yeah, they have trees up there, right?
I think so.
Awesome. So let's talk about that kind of equipment package you have. So how much does it cost to get in to the deal, and what does the basic equipment package look like? Like pickup truck, chip truck, like what other things does an owner need to kind of expect to invest in to get this thing going?
Yeah, absolutely. So the initial investment is roughly 5 to 600K.
Okay.
So 70% of that is the equipment. So roughly around, 350 of the investment is going to be equipment.
Right.
That equipment includes a mason dump pickup truck. So and that's going to pull a trailer, like a lowboy trailer, that your loader goes on. So if you're not familiar with a loader, this is basically it's a 4-wheel piece of equipment that has a grappler on the front. And what this is a man and time saver, right? So if you don't have one of these, and I'm sure you've seen it if you had tree work done, if you don't have one, the guys are basically grabbing those fallen branches
and they're walking back and forth.
Yeah. And it takes forever, and it's spraying on their back and their bodies, right? So this thing can grab, I think, 2.5 tons worth of branches at once and bring them all over to the chipper quickly, right? Same with large logs. Rather than chopping them into like man-sized pieces, you can just take the whole log and throw it in the back of the truck. So we utilize that heavily. It's a great resource to create efficiency. The last 2 pieces are going to be your chip truck and your chipper. Now, we have some additional equipment that is optional, one of them being a spider lift. So this creates, again, it's to create efficiency. That's why we use this equipment. So think of it in the beginning, your guys going to be climbing trees the way that most tree companies do with, ropes, pulleys, harnesses, things like that. But just to set that up safely can take half an hour, 45 minutes to do, right? So, if you've got a spider lift, this thing, you just pull a lever and you're in the tree in like 60 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So it creates efficiency, but they're expensive. So we usually don't make them invest that in the beginning. That's why it's optional, but it's something that we want you to look at later. And the operations partner, regional operations partner, helps them decide when that time is right.
Yeah. And with, any business that's this heavy in equipment, you said 70% of a $500,000 to $600,000 investment is equipment.
Yeah.
So there are some advantages there from a tax standpoint with
absolutely.
Section 179 bonus depreciation. I know that just depends on the individual and how their company's structured and their tax advisor, but there are some advantages there for people that buy it.
Absolutely. And also for funding, right? For getting financed. It's a lot easier to get financed when you have hard assets that you can put against the loan. So, that's a big part of this, right? If they're not self-funding and they're wanting to get financed through, a bank, having those hard assets in place are crucial to getting funding.
Yeah, makes sense. So we talked about the startup cost. Let's talk about FPRs. What kind of financial performance representations can you share with us about the model?
Yeah, so we got a strong item 19, and our top franchisee territories do about $3 million annually.
Okay.
Our average franchise does about 1.5, that's I can't remember all the different quartiles and everything, but that's the main things you want to look at. There's obviously some growth. What we consider a mature franchise is about 3 years in. So usually in year 1, we usually want to see them around the $450,000 to $500,000 mark, and then head towards that $1 million, $3 million, towards maturity. But roughly across the system, that's what we see. And most of our franchisees, by way of the model that I mentioned before, have at least 2 territories.
Okay. And do you share any kind of bottom line earnings in the item 19, or is that up to the owners to kind of share that with the candidates?
Yeah, we typically rely on, just like most franchisors, we're going to rely on the validation process to get that information, because we're limited to the amount, earnings claims that we can make about the brand. That's where we rely heavily on what's in the item 19. And again, it's very thorough. We cover a lot of different things, not just earnings. We talk about close ratios. That's important because, as we talked about before, this is a sales-driven business, right? Without sales, there's no revenue, right? So we cover all that stuff, but to get nitty-gritty in the detail, like their region, we kind of rely on our franchisees regionally to kind of give them some feedback on what their experience was.
Yeah, but it's kind of cool to see that, your franchisees can get to 60,000 a week or 30,000 a week, for an average owner. That's pretty impressive. Yeah. So it looks like you got to spend a lot to get in, and there's that barrier to entry with the equipment. But once you get the business going, there's some upside there with, big ticket jobs and the ability to bring in a lot of revenue, especially with those contracts we talked about. I'm sure a lot of it's residential, but having those, over time, as you bring in those commercial and municipal accounts, I can see how it just compounds and becomes a lot more attractive financially as you kind of scale the business.
Yeah, lots of opportunity, to earn through this business. And like I said, our goal is to even further that opportunity with this planned healthcare model, because we see that as the future, right? I mean, tree care is great. Just to give you some context, right? The average tree job is about $2,000, right? Okay. So big number, right, per job. That's great. But they take longer to do, right? And the margins aren't as good as the planned healthcare. Planned healthcare is about $200 per visit, right? But you can do a lot more of them in a day, and the margin is 70%, right? So, you got to look at it that way, and that's kind of the way we're seeing it. We don't want to rely solely on tree care. We want to really focus on building that planned healthcare, and we're doing that through training, marketing, sales techniques, et cetera.
Yeah, it's nice when you have these additional revenue streams, so an owner can kind of focus on maybe some underrepresented kind of services that are in the inventory and kind of build business that way. So you can kind of work on the same group of customers and kind of build sales and then also acquire new ones. So you have both avenues to kind of grow the business. This is awesome, man. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of share all this stuff with us. Anything else that you want to add to the mix before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I just always like to stress, don't got to be from the tree care business, right? That's super, super, super important. We've got a lot of white space available. Even though we've been around 10 years, we still got some major markets available. And reach out to Mike, see how I can help you connect. We've done work together before. He's a pleasure to work with. He treats his candidates really well, and I do as well. When he's kind enough to share them with me, I give him the white glove service.
Oh, well, I appreciate the compliment, Jason, and I feel the same way. Working with you has been great. So if anyone listening would like to connect with Jason to discuss Monster Tree Service, contact me at franchiseqb.com or on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB, and I'll get you connected with him. Thank you so much, Jason, for taking the time to get in the huddle and discuss Monster Tree Service with us.
It's been my pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thank you for listening to the Franchise QB podcast, where you're at the helm of your future as a franchise owner. If you enjoyed the content, please rate the show and recommend it to anyone that might be interested in franchising. Make sure to visit franchiseqb.com to subscribe to my newsletter and for an actionable playbook to go from walk-on to legend in your new business. Follow us on Twitter at QBFranchiseQB and join us every week for a new episode. See you next time.
Visit franchiseqb.com to take the next step of your journey towards wealth, independence, and franchise ownership. And remember, when working for the man gets old, you must do something bold. Thank you for listening.